Yo, what up, guys? So today we're going to be making a video talking about like the future of Mythic Plus and how Blizzard is looking to modernize old school WoW dungeons, and just kind of looking at some of the interviews and thinking about what Blizzard can and should be looking to do whenever they're modernizing their dungeons. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at an interview that Tally did with Ian a couple of days ago, and kind of looking at what the future of Mythic Plus entails based off of what this interview means. I think it's a great opportunity for us to first look at the interview and kind of see exactly what Ian says before we dive into that.
We're choosing these on our own. Though certainly, look forward to hearing all the discussion.
Okay, so this is what it was.
What dungeons people want to see in the future, and obviously happy to bring back fan favorites now that we have really the entire range of dungeons to choose among. So yeah, I think the current plan, we do have our 4 already picked out for season 1. It's a couple of Legion dungeons, a Warlords dungeon, and a Mists dungeon.
Okay.
We're doing Temple of the Jade Serpent from Mists, Court of Stars from Legion. You can play some Guess Who. Those are fun.
So yeah, that got announced, right? So it's like Court of Stars and Temple of the Jade Serpent were announced as the 2 dungeons, and then obviously there's like one more Legion, one more WoD dungeon that are yet to be announced. I'm interested to see what they pick. It's probably gonna be like Everbloom and something else if I had to really guess. But Jade Serpent and Court of Stars, I think, means that like they're looking for shorter dungeons, right? Because Jade Serpent is incredibly short. With Everbloom would probably be with fixed wall jumps because it is fixed now.
Routing experiments, and a couple of others.
Okay, yeah, I was really scared you were actually going to choose Shadowpan Monastery. I was going to quit the game tomorrow.
What don't you like about Shadowpan Monastery?
It's terrible.
No, really, I'm serious.
I never liked the whole layout of it. I always found it to be very just like you're always kind of slowed down either by the storms or the bridge, and I hated that last part because you just skip it anyway, right? Like everyone just goes to the right, skips through the ice, and
that depends on your enemy forces target. But
that's true.
I would say it's not happening. It's not going for season 1, but I would say Shadowpan Monastery. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it at some point over the course of Dragonflight.
I love Shadowpan.
Why'd I say anything?
But I think particularly for the older dungeons and ones that never had Mythic Plus, like the team is super open to making changes to the flow of the dungeons, looking at pacing, looking at mechanics that made sense for like a heroic dungeon queue experience, but didn't make as much sense or wouldn't make sense if you're, in the Mythic Plus timed format. So
okay, so I actually think that's the important part, right? And that's the thing I want to make the video on today. So like with Temple of the Jade Serpent and Court of Stars coming back, I actually think that I'm really a lot more happy to see older dungeons coming back with like M plus if they're willing to do things like Ian is talking about in this video. So first off, they could update the loot. I think that realistically, like we don't have to have loot from these old dungeons. They could absolutely update it to be more modern, and to kind of fit a little bit more in flow with what we kind of expect out of dungeon loot today. Because if you go back and you look at like Mist's loot, gosh, like what does Temple of the Jade Serpent even give? It's just a bunch of like, I guess like maybe people aren't upset with a trinket like this. It's just an RPPM haste trinket, but realistically, this is like a bunch of just like really bland loot. So I guess it kind of depends on the dungeons. With Warlords of Draenor in particular, I mean, like these dungeons, if you go and look at their loot tables, it's actually just the most. Oh, thank goodness that there are 5 helmets of just different stats. Okay, like that doesn't make sense. So it makes sense to modernize them that way. So in regards to mechanics, with Jade Serpent in particular, let me pull up a video of Temple of the Jade Serpent. With Temple of the Jade Serpent in particular, like whenever I was watching back through like how people were doing these dungeons, it's off. Hopefully I don't get DMCA'd for that. It's like, so these part of the dungeons are fine, and I think it's nice that it's like super short. This trash basically has no mechanics here. Kind of weird. I think that like this trash having no mechanics are fine, realistically, you're probably not going to pull everything like they're doing here. I just don't think it would make a lot of sense. But a lot of the packs are very tight, and something that I noticed for Jade Serpent in particular is, and like it concerns me, is the side to the right. So the corridor to the right, like, and so they'll probably rework like how these trash packs work just to make more sense. Context of Modern Mythic Plus, if I had to guess. But the thing that I don't know how they rework is a lot of this trash. And like a lot of this area, like how are you going to deal with on-death affixes here? Like how are you going to deal with these packs being so close to one another with on-death affixes being the way they are? Is it going to be expected that you pull all of this trash into the room? Because that doesn't make any sense. But like at the same point, if you have Sanguine in this area, like what are you going to do with Sanguine? And so I think that there is a world where they modernize some of this stuff. Maybe they change. I think the biggest thing is that they're probably going to move some of the trash packs, or they're going to change some of the trash just mechanically. And that's one of the things. Like Ian mentioned that they could potentially change the mechanics of how the trash work. But I think one of the things that they could also do is they could literally move the trash, and I think that that's super nice. And so I'm excited to see like what they do with dungeons like Shadowpan Monastery, or not Shadowpan Monastery, Temple of the Jade Serpent, with how they modernize this dungeon. There's also not very many mobs in a key, and so there's not very many mobs in this dungeon, and so I really wonder like what they're going to do for count. In addition to this, this dungeon, by the way, like this boss, you have a chance to summon between one of two bosses, and that's something that cannot stay for Mythic Plus. And so like, and in addition to that, the RP is long here. So I think that that's something they could cut down on. They could cut down the RP time. They could change some of the trash pulls here. And then like RNG boss is like not really a thing for Modern Mythic Plus. And so that's something that I would expect to actually change with Temple of the Jade Serpent. And then at that point, I'm really interested to see how it does, because it is a short dungeon, and that's like something that it looks like they're doing with the two announced dungeons being Court of Stars and Jade Serpent, like we just saw. It's like, okay, so they picked two of the shortest dungeons, and so they're going to err in that direction, is what it seems like. So then for Court of Stars, there's a lot that goes on in Court of Stars. That's a dungeon that we have seen in Mythic Plus, and I played whenever it was current, and I'm unsure like what they're going to do with it. So for those who don't know, I mean, maybe I should pull up a video of Court of Stars as well. There are a bunch of like RNG buffs that were present in Court of Stars. And so one of the advantages of the buffs was that it made the dungeon feel fresh, right? It made it feel like you weren't getting the same run every single time. But one of the downsides of the dungeon is that there were a bunch of buffs, right? And it made the RNG feel really tough sometimes, because the RNG would give you like massive advantages or disadvantages depending on what you get. Because I remember whenever this was current, things like this feast, it would give you 10% HP or whatever, and that was massive. And then there was also the brew, and that brew, the brewmaster DK brew, and that brew would give you infinite mana regen and infinite HP regen. And these two paired together were very, very powerful and needed for at least higher end keys to be able to do things. In addition to that, you had like RNG spawns on these like enforcer style mobs, and I'm just kind of like marking loosely where I remember them spawning. They were like here, 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 and here. And depending on what you were doing, the enforcer spawns could be either very good or very bad. And so it was one of these things that if you had bad enforcer spawns, that could be problematic. I hope that at least they normalize. I don't expect them to normalize the buffs, if I'm going to be honest. I think that they like that in regards to like how much flavor it adds to the dungeon, but I would at least like them to normalize kind of something to do with the enforcer spawns. Alternatively, something that somebody said in chat, what would you think of an all are available, but you can only get 3 buffs at once? That would be very interesting, because then at that point it kind of unlocks the ability to be able to do whatever you want. So the meta game, like the meta strategy, you would just literally pray for brew, you would literally pray for the food, and you would pray for the blacksmith hammer, and or the blacksmith trap. And there was certain combos of items that you could or could not get. Like you couldn't get, I want to say it was engineering orb plus the healing thing, I don't remember exactly what the combos were, but there were specific combos of items that you could get, and there were like BIS combos. I do think if they opened up the opportunity to for you to either only get like 3 or only get 4 of the buffs in total, that would actually make more sense. It would also not force you to have a balanced druid that was blacksmith, because the trap is the strongest thing in the game. And so like that kind of thing where you're like very punished by not having a specific profession and feeling like you completely need to redo your professions, that would actually be very nice. Oh, okay. So somebody says you could only get one of Flower, Fell Orb, and Elf Orb. Something like that. That's kind of how it went down, where you can only get one of a couple of different things. And so I suspect that I hope that they modernize Court of Stars at least by that. The things that I loved about Court of Stars were short timer, the fact that it did actually kind of feel like a new run every single time, and then in addition to that, just like generally the design of the final 2 bosses, they were quite fun. So something that we've kind of moved away from in Mythic Plus in recent memory is like dungeons being gated behind survivability. A lot of the times they've been gated behind damage, but it was interesting, at least in Legion, to have Court of Stars where there was a lot of outs for you to be able. So the timer was very lenient, but you had a lot of outs, and you would only deplete it by like having a lot of deaths. Is basically what happened. So your main goal, at least for the final 2 bosses, was to just live through those bosses. And we even saw it during TGP, right? Court of Stars. Let's see if I can find a video real quick. How we do? Here's a video from JB. Young JB. And so like, obviously you really the buffs were really important, is what I will say, because if you got that trap, I don't even know what they got here. Probably not the trap fight, I guess, because of where they are. Okay, so they ended up, so depending on what buffs you got, they got the flower, they got the food, and they got the orb. And so depending on what buffs you got, it made the dungeon a lot easier, or a lot more lenient. And so then the final 2 bosses were gated behind having like massive amounts of buffs. And so like it required a lot of coordination. I like the bosses. I actually enjoyed the first part of Trash, with kind of how it was dealt with, just generally. But things I didn't like the boat RP, but I don't suspect that that's going to get changed. I think that that's just something that's baked into the dungeon. But I'm really interested to see like what they go back and do, and what they change for these old dungeons and how they modernize it. They also have to modernize dungeons like seasonal affixes too, especially so Court of Stars in particular is one that they're gonna have to really think about how seasonal affixes work in that key, because right now it has Infernal, which is like totally fine. Like Infernal works great for the Legion dungeons because it's like not really intrusive, but if they go for like count-based seasonal affix, I suspect that that's not great for Court of Stars, just with how the trash works, right? The Enforcers in particular, I can't see like a percent-based seasonal affix doing super well with Court of Stars on that front. However, it may be something that we have to look at later, depending on what they announce with the seasonal affixes, but I think that they have to be really, really cautious for how the seasonal affixes are going to work with like these old legacy dungeons. That's a big one. Ian says seasonal affix will be more basic with new dungeons each season. Yeah. I suspect in season 1 the seasonal affix will be very basic. Kind of similar to what we're getting with Shrouded, right? Where Shrouded is for season 4 is very, very basic, but it's fine. It's fine that it's basic because people are having to relearn or learn these new dungeons, and it's totally okay to have an easy to understand seasonal affix for the first season. Anyways, so basically, in conclusion, I am super, super excited to see what they do with Temple of the Jade Serpent. I'm excited to see what they do with Court of Stars. I think that there is some potential pitfalls that they could fall into, but I think that the willingness to modernize the keys is something that I am super, super excited about. Anyways, I think that's gonna be the end of the YouTube video. What are you guys excited for? Are you guys excited for Court? Do you think that what other Legion dungeon do you think is coming back? Let me think. I think that Everbloom is probably the Warlords one, considering what we have for season 4. What would be the other Legion dungeon that I'd like to see come back? I guess since we already have Court, I'd be down for EOA. But EOA is a bit long. I don't know. I'd pick EOA personally. However, it is what it is. All right. We'll be back in the next video.